Alright Titans, hello and welcome to Algebra 1 9.7 Part 2. Part 2 of Chapter 9 Section 7 is going to focus on factoring trinomials whose leading coefficient is not 1. So we're going to try to factor trinomials whose leading coefficient is not 1, meaning, for example, 2x squared plus 6x plus 8. That would be a trinomial whose leading coefficient is not 1. We must begin by making sure that there is not a common factor running through a trinomial that we might factor out. That should always be the first step in factoring. Always look for a common factor to remove. If we cannot remove a common factor, then what we're going to need is to use our knowledge of multiplying binomials, meaning the FOIL method, to use the guess and check method to be able to factor the trinomial. Alright, let's jump right into this with example number 1. Example number 1 is 5x squared minus 50x plus 45. Now this looks different from what we did in class today because the leading coefficient is not x squared. Today, when the leading coefficient was x squared, we were able to just immediately say, okay, hey, the first two terms of the binomials are going to be x and x. But we can't do that here because we have a leading term that is not 1. So look for a common factor first. That's always the most important step of factoring. Always look for a common factor first. And if you notice, you do see a common factor here, and that common factor is 5. So if you take the 5 out, you're left with x squared minus 10x plus 9. X squared minus 10x plus 9. Now, we're not done right there. A lot of people say, okay, we're done, we got the common factor out, move on to the next problem. But no, we always want to check to make sure that that trinomial can't be factored. And if you look at the trinomial, it can be factored. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 5 that we've already pulled out front, and then I'm going to factor that trinomial. Think about this, students. What can add to negative 10 and multiply to 9? Well, if you think about the factors of 9 that are going to add to be a negative, your choices are negative 1 and 9, 1 and negative 9, negative 3 and positive 3. Which one of those would be a correct choice there? Excuse me, those should both be negatives. The choice that is correct is negative 1 and negative 9. So it would be x minus 1, x minus 9. So that would be completely factoring that trinomial. So in example number 1, what I'm trying to emphasize here is always look for a common factor first. Then when you pull that common factor out, you may be able to still factor that trinomial that's remaining. Alright, let's look at example number 2 now. If you look at this example, you'll notice there's no common factor. So the question becomes, well, what do we do if there is no common factor? Is it just prime? Well, not so fast on the prime selection for a solution. We want to go ahead and see if it can be factored. Now, what method do we use? There's really no shortcut here, ladies and gentlemen. It's just simply the guess and check method. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and set up your two binomials and just make some educated guesses. Now, we can go through the thought process here together to help you kind of understand what you want to do here to figure out what your two binomials could be. Let's go ahead and look at the first term. The first term is 2x squared. Now what's going to multiply to be 2x squared? Well, the only thing that multiplies to be 2x squared is 2x and x. Okay, there's nothing else that can multiply to be 2x squared. So we know that the first two terms in our binomials are going to have to be 2x and x. Now we need to go ahead and figure out what the last term is. Well, I know since everything's positive here that I'm going to have a plus. Now I need to go ahead and think of the factors of 4. What are the factors of 4? Well, 4 can be 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. So now I just have to go ahead and try these, plug them in, and see if they work. So let's plug in 1 and 4. Does 1 and 4 work? Well, if I FOIL this, the f works out. 2x times x is 2x squared. The outside is 8x. The inside is 1x. And the last is 4. And if I combine my outside and my inside, I get 9x. So therefore, that's my solution. 2x plus 1, x plus 4. So to factor when the leading coefficient is not 1 is basically just the guess and check method. Meaning, think about what your first terms could be, make a guess, check it. If you're wrong, guess again. The guess and check method is the best way to factor a trinomial whose leading coefficient is not 1. Alright, our last example of our lesson is 3x squared plus 5x minus 12. Once again, the leading coefficient is not 1, and there's no common term. So we're going to factor this by the guess and check method. So let's go ahead and create our two binomials. And let's go ahead and start by looking at the first terms. Now what can create 3x squared? 3x and what? 1x. 3x and 1x are the only thing that can create 3x squared. So we know that those are our first two terms. Now we have to determine what is going to be our last term. Well, we want to look at this with kind of a little bit of strategy, and that is to look at what creates negative 12. Well, the middle term is positive, and the last term is negative, so we know that our two signs are going to be different. We're going to have one be a plus and one be a subtraction. So what creates negative 12? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is negative 1 and 12. So we have those two pairings. Then we have obviously 2 and negative 6, negative 2 and 6. We got negative 3 and 4. We got 3 and negative 4. Those are the possibilities. What you choose first is kind of up to you. I'm going to go here and start with, I'm going to kind of work from the bottom up. So I'm going to try 3 and negative 4 first. So I'm going to try to plug in a positive 3 and a negative 4. That would not work. It would meet the requirements for the first term and the last term, but if you look at the outside and inside, the outside is negative 12 and the inside is positive 3. And there's no way that negative 12 plus 3 can give me a solution of positive 5 in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and guess again. That's the whole process here. Guess, check, guess, check. So if I go ahead with my second guess, I'm just going to switch these around. I'm going to make this a negative 4 and make this a positive 3. Now, does my second guess work? Well, if I FOIL it, 3x times x is 3x squared. The last terms obviously work out with negative 4 and 3. And then if I look at the outside-inside loop, yep, it works. I'd have 9x and negative 4x. And what is 9x plus negative 4x? That would be 5x. So my answer is 3x minus 4 times x plus 3. Alright students, now you go ahead and try these two examples. Remember, the first step is to always look for a common factor. If there's a common factor, pull out that common factor and then see if what's remaining inside the parentheses can be factored any further. If there's no common factor, then you're going to want to go ahead and use the guess and check method. So go ahead and try number 1 and number 2. I promise you that both of these problems are not prime. They can be factored. So give number 1 and number 2 a try, then pause the video and see if you can get them correct. Go ahead and pause it now. Alright Titans, here's your solutions for number 1 and number 2. Hopefully this video helps you understand what to do if the leading coefficient is not 1. Have a good evening.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.